Coming up on Great Lakes Now, has this Great Lakes freighter made her last voyage?
The vessel is still actively taking on water, and we're making preparations to abandon ship. And that's when everybody's hair really stood on end.
And a legal battle with big implications for farms and wetlands.
This is far greater than one stream and one wetland in Iowa. This directly comes down and affects us and affects our neighbors.
This program was brought to you by the Fred and Barbara Earp Family Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Richard C. Devereaux Foundation for Energy and Environmental Programs at Detroit PBS, Polk Family Fund, DTE Foundation, and contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Seisling. Welcome to Great Lakes Now. It's been 50 years since a ship sank in the Great Lakes, but in the summer of 2024, one freighter came dangerously close. For one crew member, the experience was life-changing.
Kent Nuchtell grew up in Port Dover, a fishing community in southern Ontario on the shores of Lake Erie. He was a golf course superintendent who decided to shift careers. He started working aboard freighters and loved the move from the land to the lakes.
When you're out there, you're like, it's like freedom. And everybody that you work with becomes like a family member. You're all one big family. It was awesome. I loved it.
Kent started his sailing career as a deckhand 20 years ago. His first job was on the Michipicoten, a 698-foot freighter that was built to carry iron ore from one side of Lake Superior to the other.
It was a narrower boat. It rolled a lot. You could feel the roll a lot. It pitched a lot. So that was the big thing with it. A lot of guys get seasick like I don't. It doesn't bother me one bit.
Kent sailed on a few other ships as he worked his way up the ladder. In 2018, he returned to the Michipicoten as the ship's second engineer. The Michipicoten was one of the largest ships on the Great Lakes when it was built in 1952 for the Interlake Steamship Company. At the time, she was named the Elton Hoyt II. The Canadian company, Lower Lakes Towing, acquired the Hoyt in 2003 and renamed it the Michipicoten, after a river in northern Ontario. Her usual route took her along the cliffs of the Big Lake, navigating the ever-changing waters of Lake Superior.
It's a tough lake to work on. Like, it could be calm, like not calm, but 1-footers. And then you turn around and you got 10-footers. It turns on you in a heartbeat.
June 8, 2024 was an unusually quiet day on Lake Superior. Winds were 9 to 10 knots out of the west, only 1-foot waves, and the visibility was good.
It was the calmest day I've seen on that lake. I've never seen Lake Superior that flat.
In the early morning hours, the Michipicoten, loaded with iron ore, was bound from Two Harbors, Minnesota, on her way to the Algoma Steel Mill in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. She was about 38 miles southwest of Isle Royale when the crew discovered a problem. Freighters like the Michipicoten carry ballast water in their holds to keep the boat stable when they're empty. But the Michipicoten wasn't empty. Kent was on watch when he got a call from the ship's mate. There was water in the ballast of the ship.
I said, well, we got 20,000-ton iron ore on board. There should be no water in this boat. So I brought the ballast screen up on the computer, and there's 4 feet of water in there. I said, that's weird. I said, well, whatever, I'll go down and get the ballast. I'll pump this water out. I looked over at the list meter, and I saw we had about a 5-degree list at that time. That means the boat's leaning to one side. So just in that short a time, I didn't even get out of the control room door. The phone rings again, and it's the captain. He says, we're taking on water. I look at the screen, it's now at 7 feet. Within about a half a minute, it had gone up that much.
When the ship lists with a full cargo, the cargo rolls to one side, making even a small 5-degree list a potential threat.
I hung up, I ran down, I got all the ballast valves opened up, I got the pump going. And I was gone maybe 4 or 5 minutes at the most out of the control room. And when time I got back up to the control room, I looked at the screen, it was at 11'9". And I said, this isn't good.
Water was coming in faster than the Michipicoten could pump it out. Kent called the bridge and spoke to the captain.
I told him, I said, we're not going to keep up to this water. We're going to have to call the Mayday. And then I looked again, and we were now at 14 and a half feet in that short a time.
At 6:46 a.m., the U.S. Coast Guard received a distress call from the Michipicoten. Aboard the ship, the captain instructed the crew to get their survival suits on. That's when Kent encountered a crew member from his hometown who was struggling, and not just with his gear.
I kind of feel connected to this guy. And I went over and I grabbed him and I said, come on, man, I got to get your suit on you. So I got a suit on him, and his tears are running down his face. He's panicking. And I said, you get your shit together or you die today. You got a choice.
This type of emergency is uncommon on the Great Lakes, but the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald proves that tragedies can happen. But the Fitz sank during a powerful November storm. Would the Michipicoten go down almost half a century later on a calm day in June? Aboard the freighter, nobody knew for certain. The chief engineer on the Michipicoten had only been on board for 3 days, so the task of keeping the ship upright rested with Kent, the second engineer. His job, keeping the engines running so the pumps would keep working. The ship was listing at 15 degrees when Kent headed back to the engine room to start another auxiliary pump. He stopped briefly to reach out to his wife Janet and his son Nick.
I had no cell service at all. I sent her a text. I said, if anything happens, remember I love you and Nick. Then I wrote a note in the control room. I wrote a note. Just said, tell God I'm sorry. And then the next thing, I was up on deck again, and I saw the American Coast Guard coming, and then there's another freighter out there.
That freighter was the Edwin H. Gott, one of the Great Lakes 1,000-footers. She was about 15 miles away from the Michipicoten when the distress call went out. At 8:42, she arrived on the scene. She was the first vessel to reach the Michipicoten.
Coast Guard 136, Sector Northern on 2 and Alpha. Clock you for 5 minutes. Sector out.
At 9:13 a.m., the response boat from the Coast Guard station in Bayfield, Wisconsin arrived on the scene, followed by the National Park Service vessel Peregrine and a Jayhawk helicopter from the station in Traverse City, Michigan. Lieutenant Joseph Snyder is with the United States Coast Guard station in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, that coordinated the response to the Michipicoten.
So feeling, still very apprehensive because the vessel was still actively taking on water, but it looked like they were stabilized. And then at about 10 o'clock, they updated us and let us know they were still taking on water and were making preparations to abandon ship. And that's when everybody's hair really stood on end, and we realized that we might have a really, really substantial incident on our hands.
The ballast tanks run along the bottom and sides of the ship and can go up to 25 feet in depth. The water stopped at 19 feet 8 inches when the pressure in the tanks matched the pressure of the lake. But according to Kent, if any more water came in and the waves increased, the ship would twist, causing a bulkhead to crack. If that happened, the Michipicoten could roll over or split apart.
Everything should stay right there. As long as the vessel doesn't twist, the bulkhead should stay in place, because it's the pressure in that tank that will blow out them bulkheads.
The decision was made to evacuate non-essential crew members. At 10:24 a.m., 11 of the 22 crew members were transferred by ladder to the U.S. Coast Guard response boat. The Michipicoten headed slowly to Thunder Bay, Ontario, the closest port that was available to her. She was escorted by both the U.S. and Canadian Coast Guards, which provided some comfort to those crew members still on the ship.
Lake Superior is a very cold lake. I've never saw that lake the whole time I've been up there get above 64 degrees. You're not going to last long in that water, even in a survival suit. You got a chance, but you also have a chance of dying. The Coast Guard's there. They're staying right with us. We're fine in that respect. If we do go in the water now, at least they're there to pick us up.
At 7 p.m. that evening, nearly 12 hours after the first distress call, the Michipicoten limped into the harbor in Thunder Bay. In the days that followed, divers were able to determine that the Michipicoten had sustained a 13-foot crack in her hull, likely a stress fracture. The crack was patched, and the decision was made to sail the boat to Duluth for further repairs, not tow it.
Michipicoten will be inbound Duluth entrance harbor here, going through Duluth Piers in approximately 15 minutes.
On June 20, the Michipicoten arrived at the harbor in Duluth and was met with cheers from a crowd that had been following her plight. But Kent Knechtel never heard the cheers. He wasn't on board the Michipicoten.
They asked the crew to take it back to Duluth. And I said, not me. Not after what I went through. I'm not doing it. A lot of guys did, some of the guys left, but there was no way I was doing it. Like, there was no reason for anybody to take that they could have towed it. And I said, I'm not doing that. They couldn't have paid me $1 million to take it. You want a coffee?
Sure, sounds good.
Kent says the experience he had aboard the Michipicoten has stayed with him.
After we got to Thunder Bay, I was stable, I was fine. And then I started having nightmares of the boat rolling over and I'm hanging off the side of it. And then I called my son the one night, and I was talking to him before I went to bed. And that night I had a dream that he was on the deck, and I had to reach down and grab him before he went in the water. And that's when I said, that's it.
Kent chose to retire early, and he's vowed never to sail the Great Lakes again. He says he often thinks about that June morning when Lake Superior was so calm. What if it hadn't been?
Well, we wouldn't be sitting here. Plain and simple. It ended up with it had a 13-foot crack under it, and it would have progressed right across that. It would have split that boat.
According to Transport Canada, the regulatory agency of the Canadian government, the Michipicoten has not been cleared to resume operations. Her future is uncertain. We haven't been able to confirm with her owner, the Canadian shipping company, Lower Lakes Towing, if she will ever sail again. For now, she's in a Wisconsin shipyard. And Kent? Well, he's still working on engines, smaller ones now, and back on land.
It changed my attitude towards life. I'll tell you that. It gives you more respect for everybody around you. Yeah, it changes you. But in the respects of living my life, I just know I got a lot more time to play golf.
Real quick, at Great Lakes Now, we tell stories about the Great Lakes and the people who call them home. And it's only possible thanks to viewers like you. To support our work and uncover more stories from around the region, consider making a donation at greatlakesnow.org. Now, on to our next story. A lawsuit over wetlands is winding its way through the federal courts, and its outcome can have big consequences for farmers, landowners, and the environment.
John Gilbert is a fourth-generation farmer. He and his brother Greg raise hogs, beef cattle, and soybeans on 800 acres of land in Hardin County, Iowa.
In this era when we have virtual this and virtual that and virtual just about everything, the land is probably one of the realest things we have. And it is really something we need to be cherishing because, quite frankly, all life on Earth depends on how well we look after our soils.
Nearly 120 miles to the east, Steve Besler and his wife Ellie Gaudent own a farm near Worthington, Iowa.
I grew up on my family's farm About 20 miles southeast of here.
It's something I've always loved. My first task as a kid was to pick eggs. And from there, we went to bottle feeding calves. We dairy farmed and raised hogs growing up. Farming's been in my blood, and it's thick as can be. So there's no getting the farming out of me.
It's safe to say that for Steve, Ellie, and the Gilbert brothers, farming is a way of life. But there's a pending court case that could impact their way of life by stripping away what many environmentalists consider to be the last guardrail against the destruction of precious wetlands. The case is CTM Holdings LLC versus USDA, and the guardrail is a provision in the U.S. Farm Bill called Swamp Buster. Katie Garvey is an attorney with the Environmental Law and Policy Center in Chicago. She's intervening in this case, representing Iowa farmers.
What Swamp Buster says is if you want to be eligible to receive farm benefits, you're agreeing to not drain, dredge, or fill your wetlands in order to grow crops on them.
The benefits include crop insurance, disaster relief, and USDA loans. There's a similar provision called Sod Buster that aims to preserve farmland that's been declared highly erodible and remove it from agricultural production.
If you want to be eligible for farm benefits and you have these highly erodible soils on your land, you have to agree not to farm those. So that's the history of why Swamp Buster and Sod Buster were passed.
The USDA enacted Swamp Buster in 1985 as a way to preserve wetlands that were quickly being plowed under or drained on farms across the country. Jim Conlon, a hedge fund manager in suburban Chicago, is challenging Swamp Buster by suing the federal government. His investment firm, CTM Holdings, owns more than 1,000 acres of farmland in Iowa. The land at the center of this court case is a 72-acre parcel near the small town of Delaware, Iowa, population 140, which Conlon rents out to a local farmer. About 9 acres of that land are considered wetlands. Under the Swamp Buster provision, the USDA pays Conlon in the form of subsidies for not plowing those 9 acres. Subsidies that are passed on to the farmer who rents Conlon's land. Conlon argues that the Swamp Buster provision is unconstitutional.
And the reason I say that is because the federal government prohibits it from being used for anything that has any economic value at all. You can't farm it, you can't build on it, you can't clear it, take the stumps out of it, and the underlying land is probably worth $20,000 an acre. If you could, it's worth zero, it's actually worth less than zero.
But Swamp Buster is purely voluntary. So why doesn't Conlon just opt out of the program?
What you could do is you could decertify that 72 acres, forego all federal government programs entirely, and then the federal government couldn't make you do anything, couldn't require you to do anything. You couldn't participate in any of those programs. That would make it difficult for a farmer to rent that land because the federal government's involvement in agriculture is pervasive. It's difficult for a farmer, a renter, for example, to operate without USDA supports.
Conlon maintains that the 9 acres of wetlands on his property are not always wet and are not connected to any other body of water. Jeffrey McCoy with the Pacific Legal Foundation is one of the attorneys representing Conlon.
The purported wetlands at issue here are completely on the property. They're not connected to any other water. They are not connected to any navigable waterway. So Congress could not directly regulate these wetlands on his property. That would exceed the Interstate Commerce Clause in the Constitution. And so instead what Congress did was it threatens to withhold benefits that they had been awarding for decades prior to passing Swamp Buster in order to force farmers to comply with a regulation that they couldn't impose directly.
I've never met an actual real farmer that has anything good to say about the wetland laws and regulations. They despise them. I don't know who the hobby farmers are that are near there or what environmental groups they're part of. But if you interviewed 100 farmers in Iowa of various sizes, I don't think you could find one out of that typical 100 that would share that view.
But contrary to what Conlon says, there are about 2,000 farmers in Iowa and South Dakota who are fighting to save Swamp Buster.
Farmers are in a very vulnerable position to be making claims of entitlement. I knew that land had wetland determinations when I bought it 2 years ago, but now I think it's unfair. That's like talking with your mouth full.
Gilbert and other farmers are concerned about increased flooding on their farms if Conlon wins and Swamp Buster is overturned. Wetlands slow water down, storing floodwater and preventing it from inundating farms, homes, and riverfront towns further downstream. That's why Steve and Ellie are concerned.
We're downstream from the land in question in this lawsuit. We're about 12 miles southeast of this wetlands in question. And this is far greater than one stream and one wetland in Iowa. This directly comes down and affects us and affects our neighbors.
Katie Garvey of the Environmental Law and Policy Center says if Swamp Buster is struck down, it will impact farmers and landowners nationwide.
Every acre of wetland holds 1 million gallons of water. If there's a whole bunch of water that comes and those 9 acres are gone, that's 9 million gallons of water that has to go somewhere. And where does it go? It goes downstream.
But Conlon's attorney sees it differently.
So whether Mr. Conlon succeeds or not, other farmers are not going to be hurt. They would still receive the same benefits that they receive, but those farmers that need to farm their whole property will be able to do so.
A recent study conducted by the Union of Concerned Scientists found that 30 million acres of wetlands in the upper Midwest, including the Great Lakes region, provide nearly $23 billion in annual flood mitigation for homeowners. Over the long term, the study estimates that protecting these wetlands could prevent between $323 billion and more than $700 billion in residential flood damages in the upper Midwest. Garvey says wetlands also play a vital role in mitigating water pollution.
They are the kidneys of the earth. They are providing filtration. They're removing toxins. And if a lot of those go away, there's going to be a lot more toxicity going into the Great Lakes.
But for Conlon, this case comes down to the rights of landowners.
I'm pro-environment. I'm pro-collective action, but I'm also pro-property rights, which is if you're going to take from me for the benefit of society generally, including me, you have to pay me.
I don't have any reason to doubt that the plaintiff feels genuinely and subjectively aggrieved that he's not allowed to do whatever he wants with his land and get free money from the government, but that is not a legally cognizable injury. We might call that feelings, we might call that opinions, we might call that entitlement. It's not a legal injury.
The outcome of the case could affect wetlands and waterways throughout the United States, but Garvey says that by seeking to eliminate the federal government's power to attach conditions to benefits, the case could have even broader effects.
We're all familiar with federal benefits. They all have eligibility requirements. Social Security, SNAP, Medicare, Medicaid. All of those requirements will be called into question. It would radically curtail what Congress is able to do, and it would really have an extremely negative impact on taxpayers because all of a sudden they'd be forced to be paying for programs that Congress couldn't put any eligibility requirements or any strings attached to.
For the farmers fighting to keep Swamp Buster, the lawsuit hits closer to home.
Those of us who work the land, we leave footprints and shadows on the land. You know, the ethic we have, the relationship we have with the land is totally foreign to a lot of the outside people who are coming in and basically prostituting the land.
This is not an Iowan. This is someone who lives in Chicago, who has an investment property and is trying to make a change that affects Iowa farmers.
If you look at the wetlands as an endangered species, swamp busters and sod busters is kind of the last remaining line to keep some of that wetlands in conservation.
On May 29th of this year, a federal judge ruled against CTM Holdings. Attorneys for CTM plan to appeal all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary.
Thanks for watching. For more about any of the stories in this show, visit greatlakesnow.org. When you get there, you can follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to get updates about our work. See you out on the lakes.
This program was brought to you by the Fred and Barbara Earp Family Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Richard C. Devereaux Foundation for Energy and Environmental Programs at Detroit PBS, Polk Family Fund, DTE Foundation, and contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.